for there to be a reckoning and to move into a place, even if we were to get there in my lifetime, which I doubt, of reconciliation, I wonder how you make those transitions if you have to change someone's ideological makeup, right? Like there is a fundamental difference between us and them, and it is not what they perceive just as our physical difference. There is a spiritual difference in our understanding of scarcity versus abundance. If you look at the world as there is not enough, so I have to scrape and scrap for everything, then I'm going to be less giving. And what is required in, I think, our collective consciousness and the conscious raising is the idea that we have to move into this place. And so my question for you is, how do you shift people outside of their ideological makeup? Because that is fundamentally where these people are.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's a difficult thing to address and to acknowledge because the ideological difference is so deeply entrenched, right? As you said, it's not simply a Manichaean distinction between us and them, so that automatically at birth, a priori, we have a racialized difference that Black people and white people, never the twain shall meet. No, it's waiting for the society in which we live to grant meaning to race. This is what we mean by race as a social construct. It's not a biologically determined identity. It is a deeply rooted and profoundly entrenched set of practices that are passed on from generation to generation, from culture to culture. And so as a result of that, when we talk about these ideological matrices that ground the differences between those who fundamentally disagree with each other, there ain't no easy overcoming that. It's like in the history of science, when the writer talks about the incommensurable vocabularies, y'all speaking past each other. They speaking language over here, you speaking the language over there, and never the twain shall meet, never the ideals shall connect. And so it's extremely important for us to understand, as you said, that there has to be a paradigm shift. It can't just be we're going to overcome by saying Black Lives Matter. We have to have a serious scrutiny, a rigorous interrogation of the practices, the politics, the policies that we promote, and the ideals that we nurture in our bosom, and the tolerance or intolerance for otherness that we should exhibit or that we do exhibit. And so it seems at many times is a huge disconnect and a huge divide, because if your fundamental orientation is to believe that most people are treated fairly and Black people, yes, they are not being treated fairly, but y'all got to stop asking for so much and stop being so demanding and so on and so forth. Or like a letter I got the other day, a well-meaning white person saying, hey, it's both sides, and so the both siderisms comes in. And I want to, say to him, it ain't equal, sir. It ain't the same thing. Even, yes, we should both dialogue. Both sides should have an understanding. And when I say both sides, we know that there are complicated, nuanced
right.
complexities. All people are not monolithic on either side or on all sides. Having said that, when we acknowledge that there are some fundamental oppositions going on, some bipolar oppositions going on, and some crude and rather powerful differences that are being articulated and expressed, it ain't the easiest thing in the world to overcome that stuff and to figure out what to do and to pretend that, hey, we're both equal. You have your viewpoint, I have mine. And if we get along, that's fine. If we don't, there it is. One side had a greater responsibility in creating the mess we're in now. So we can't pretend that Black people and brown people and indigenous people have had an equal role in the kind of racial miasma, the kind of racial cataclysm and crisis that we confront now. Whiteness has had a huge dominant role in messing stuff up. And unless we acknowledge that, we can't pretend that, oh, you talk and I talk and it's both sides of the coin thing. The lion's share of responsibility belongs to those who have benefited from and been advantaged by the racial inequalities that exist. And it's hard for them to give that up. Even under the rubric of, under the umbrella of being anti-racist, it's hard to give up white privilege in order to live out the true meaning of anti-racism in this country, because anti-Blackness is so deeply ensconced and rooted in this culture that it's hard to extirpate those roots. It's hard to pull them up. It's hard to help eviscerate the horrible plague of white supremacy when one has been advantaged by it. Not the worst elements, calling people the N-word, or trying to block them from moving in your neighborhood, but some of that stuff, redlining. It's all right to talk about diversity as long as I ain't got to live next door to you, as long as my kids ain't got to go to the same school as yours, and the like. So yes, those radically dissimilar viewpoints can't be overcome by a kumbaya moment of Black Lives Matter, and now we all can say it. You've got to affirm it. You've got to say that it is something that must be embraced. And if you do that, that means you got to change your habits of mind and of heart as well.
If somebody is actually interested, right, and not just what we have seen over the past summer as what I, and many other people I would refer to as some type of social justice internship that white people found themselves in. And then once the fall came, it was like, oh, so I'm done, right? Like I can go back to doing what I'm doing.
Right, right.
But there is a set. I do still believe that this time is different. And maybe that is me being naive, but I want to say that it's me being hopeful, which I struggle with. But if there is a set of folk that are saying, you know what, we need to disrupt this. This disruption is necessary and it needs to be consistent. What is aside from reading your works and connecting with the truth that you offer on a regular basis? What is what are the steps? If you were to give just one or two, what are the steps that white folks can do in this moment at this time to be a part of this long-term solution? Because my feeling, my concern is that we will rush past the pain of the last 4 and 5 years under this regime that we were in, where white supremacy got its king and its rise, that we will move to this place of healing. And I'm confused about how you heal things that you don't face. I'm confused about how you heal things that you don't look for ointment for and acknowledge that there is actually a wound, right? And so I feel like there is a desire to rush past because we just want to exhale. But I'm like, Black people have been holding their breath, which is why we've been saying we can't breathe. So if you're going to give advice to folks about how to continue the disruption without losing their mind, what would be some advice that you would impart on folks?
Yeah, that's so eloquently articulated. I think that, look, there are some who are serious, and those folk who are serious, we got to undergird them. We got to help them out. We got to give them some advice, and is what you're talking about. But to acknowledge, the wound without, getting the ointment without the wound. It's like getting the Holy Ghost without getting saved. That's called listening to the baby or Aretha Franklin. So what's interesting is that, the first thing I would say to folk is read. Please read. And I don't mean just read, read, yes, read Dyson and Kendi and Coates and Hooks and Du Bois and all the great ones, with the exception of myself. Read all those folk. But my God, read history, read about Black Reconstruction, know what affirmative action is, know what the argument is for reparations, have a be conversant with the history of our struggle, so we ain't got to keep reinventing it every time and break down the history lesson. If we got to keep re-articulating algebra, we can't never get to trigonometry. Build on this stuff, but we can't get to trigonometry if you ain't studied your basic math. And if you don't know that 2 + 2 = 4 or 2 - 2 is 0, how are we going to be doing the more complicated negotiations with advanced calculus? And it's important in race because a lot of people talking and they don't know what the hell they're talking about. What have you read? What have you studied? Not to suggest that if they read, they will automatically agree.
Right.
Because there are a lot of smart people who are scholars who disagree with each other, writers who disagree with each other. But it does make a difference if you could reference these points of emergence of racial crisis, the development of a narrative of cultural cohesion at the expense of Black identity, if you knew what the qualms of Black identity were, if you knew what light versus dark was about, if you knew what the Southern the migration of Black people from the South, if you had read The Warmth of Other Suns, read, understand the major themes of our culture.
Mm.
Now, having done that, it's to implement the multiple levels of allyship or accompliship or whatever you want to call it within white culture. And there are multiple levels. As Meek Mill says, there's levels to this ish. So the thing is that if you're a beginner, read. If you are, want to be a little bit more advanced, read and study and have other study groups to study what y'all reading. You want to be a little bit more advanced, figure out how y'all can become more directly involved. Like many white people were involved in the marches over the summer. That was big. The reason those numbers swole to epic proportions, and there were the biggest marches in American history, because a lot of white folks said enough is enough too. Like, I don't know what that is, but it ain't right.
Right. Right.
And I might not be able to articulate a sophisticated conception of, restorative justice in the face of bitter white supremacy, but that stuff right there, I know that ain't cool. And so let's leverage the knowledge they have, the inclination to participate, by challenging them to do more.
Mm-hmm.
Marching is one thing, standing in protest is another thing, but then going to your own source and root, to your own white society, and thinking it is important. Now, look, for instance, think about the 1619 Project that got all kind of, hate and everything coming from coming from a lot of even liberal white historians. We know the right wing was going to be mad,
Mm-hmm.
but the liberal white historians, this is not right, some things are not right. Well, okay, I mean, everybody going to make mistakes and be flawed, but at the same time, the overall scheme of what 1619 was about or is about is extremely important. And white historians just can't take it. No, they trying to change it. No, this ain't right. How could you say the founding fathers, were interested in, defending enslavement as the basis of their citizenship and founding a country? Huh? Where you been? Why would it be impossible to imagine that when at the time of the founding of this nation, enslavement was at one of its heights? Of course, they wanted to protect the institution of slavery. Of course, the 13 colonies, as they forged this more perfect union, had racial intolerance as the basis of their, primarily, the basis of their interaction with Black folk, the ongoing enslavement of Black people, the subordination of Black people to white hegemony. So why is it that something we can't even imagine? So Nicole Hannah-Jones at the New York Times took all kind of hell, but still won a Pulitzer Prize, and people mad. White journalists, white liberal historians mad what she was doing. So, it's one thing to say you about it, one thing to say you're open. And I'm not saying there's an automatic acceptance of whatever Black scholars or thinkers do, but I'm saying examine the basis of what you're talking about. So you got to read, you got to study, you got to come together, you got to be willing to put your body on the line, like many of the white people did in the summer. And then you got to come to your institutions of higher education, journalism, New York Times, your schools, and say, we got to implement some of these practices here. Your corporate structures, we got to implement some of those practices here. Because it's one thing to be about it in them streets. It's another thing to be about it in them suites.
Mm-hmm.
Interrogation of our practices that have perpetuated the legacy of inequality. Like I said, anything that ends in system has to be examined. And when we talk about where we are as white people, then you've got to understand that you can't just navel gaze, but you got to look outward and understand what Black people have been up against, and understand how you examine and, in one sense, scrutinize your own practices and policies and perspectives, so that you can understand the degree to which you have been unwittingly, but nonetheless effectively cooperating with and complicitous in some of the very racism you claim to oppose.